Good morning, Luke Perry. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. What are your thoughts? Here we are, 16 months away from the election, the midterm elections, and we already have a race underway here in the 22nd Congressional District.
Well, I think it's certainly going to be competitive. There's two strong candidates, and they're vocal in a variety of different ways, and I think it's going to be quite a long and interesting race for sure.
First, I want to ask you, Anthony Brindisi, coming out early. He says he's coming out because he's known in this part of the district, but there's many other people out there to the south and even out to the Oswego area and out that way. Up that way, that don't really know who he is. Do you buy that? And do you find what do you think of that strategy to come out so early?
Well, sure. I think certainly that's part of it. He wants to try to build name recognition beyond Oneida County, where he's most familiar. And then, of course, fundraising is important as well, right? I mean, you got to raise usually about $1 million to be successful in the House, and that takes time. So I think that it makes sense in both of those ways. At the same time, I also think if you're going to launch a campaign, you want to be firing on all cylinders. So yeah. I think, as he's acknowledged, it's a startup, and there's some work to do there. And I think the sooner he's able to do that, the better for his campaign.
On the other hand, let's look to, and by the way, they're estimating a lot more money than what you would normally see spent in a congressional race. A lot of money being spent here in this market.
Well, right. So the figure I reference usually is what the candidates come up with themselves, and there'll be a lot of outside money, both from political parties and political action committees that'll be raised. And this is a race that's being targeted nationally. So, yeah, I expect an abnormal amount of money coming in over the next year and a half.
Let's talk about the Congresswoman. I just want to talk strategy and dig in on this. We have 3 public interviews that we've referenced. She was on a radio show in Albany, on a radio show in Rochester and Syracuse, and, of course, the interview with the USA Today, talking about Anthony Brindisi and referencing his family. It seems like it's a conscious decision that she's made. It just didn't pop out in the interview. What's the strategy, and is she acting like an incumbent here?
Well, I think it's unconventional, for sure. Usually family is off limits if they're not political figures or politicians. So the way I make sense of this is about turnout, right? So that's what elections basically come down to. The party in power usually experiences a dip in turnout in midterm elections. So Republicans are facing depressed turnout based on recent trends. So if you're Congresswoman Tenney, how do you seek to overcome that? You appeal to your base. I think what we're learning is that she views her base as Trump supporters. So how do you motivate Trump supporters? You say things that are critical of the opponent. That was very much Trump's playback in the presidential election. Yeah. So I think she's launching these attacks to try to appeal to her base and to ensure that turnout is sufficient for her to win.
Is her base enough, though? In this is an interesting district. It's not. It's far more moderate than I think we want to believe. This is not a hard right Republican district in the 22nd.
Well, sure. So all calculations in a campaign, as you know, are about perceived risks and perceived rewards. So I mentioned the rewards. Now the risks are that she's going to alienate Republican voters, particularly moderates, as you mentioned, Hannah supporters, these types of things, who will, look at this and either be turned off or, if worse, offended, and might be less likely to support her and cross party lines. So I think that will really determine the success of the strategy. Now, a second consideration is earned media, right? Another thing that Trump demonstrated in American politics is that if you say things that, border on outrageous or are outrageous, you're going to get a large amount of earned media coverage. Yeah. We've seen that in the USA Today interview. As you mentioned, there's a series of comments here. Why would USA Today take the time to interview her for 5 minutes and focus on that? It's because it was something that caught their attention. So she is getting a lot of earned media for this, including our conversation as well.
Sure, yeah.
So that's part of the strategy as well. And trying to brand Brindisi in a certain way as voters are just settling in over the last couple of weeks, and particularly moderate Republicans trying to decide if they're going to vote for him. She's trying to sway him sway them the other way, of course.
You know, when they went after Claudia Tenney when in this last congressional race, and even the one that when she challenged Richard Hanna, it seemed like outside advertising came in, and they tried to attach her to Cuomo in one of the commercials. She's a rubber stamp,
and she had voted with Silver 86% of the time.
It didn't seem to. I when we watched those commercials, I remember just looking at it and saying that is the dumbest strategy ever. Who's going to buy that? She, of course, is trying to attach Brindisi to Cuomo, and certainly that would work, and probably is good strategy. But it might not work as well here as it will out in Binghamton, for instance. So in Binghamton, they don't know Claudia Tenney, they don't know Anthony Brindisi. This whole attaching him to his father, this Italian thing, it might work better in outside the Utica Rome area. What do you think? Outside the Mohawk Valley?
I agree. I think generally in more rural areas, obviously that's where Trump supporters are more prevalent. And, it tends to be more Republican. I think, in between the two big cities in our district, that strategy will work better than closer to them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, the Cuomo association is going to be a constant, I think, from the Tenney campaign, as well as Pelosi, right? I mean, this is also
I think
a
those
Republican
are two
strategy, try to associate opponents with unpopular figures within the Republican Party. So we've seen that, and I think that makes sense given the circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a good, for her, I think that's certainly a good strategy. And then one other abnormality in this campaign, and again, hard to even call it a campaign 16 months out, but that's what we're in the midst of here. I find it interesting that some Republicans are finding themselves with this race in a very difficult situation because Anthony Brindisi has been appealing to Republicans. He's pro-gun. He's probably one of the leading political figures in our area when it comes to trying to advance the area, pushing for nanotech. He was out strong against Cuomo when everything with AMS fell to pieces and the governor wasn't making a trip here. So a lot of people like him. He's well known here. And it places Republicans who might have voted for Claudia Tenney and might like Claudia Tenney in a conundrum. What do you do? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it demonstrates how this is really more of a local race than a national race. And it's harder to brand people impressions of someone who they already know, right? So as you said, Brindisi is well known. And you've got both of these candidates who are really going to be battling for Oneida County. I suspect both of them think they can win Oneida County, and who does will be a large factor in determining who wins the race. So, yeah. I mean, I think to me it brings up the idea of local politics and how it's a lot more retail and relationships than it is sort of big advertising and campaign themes.
Now, you have a blog that you do, Utica College Center of Public Affairs and Election Research, and you focus in on something you call the NY22 Minute. You were down in Binghamton, right? Were you down there?
No, somebody from the center was, but it wasn't me.
Got it. Okay. My question: how big is that part of the district? So you have Oswego, you have basically the Mohawk Valley, and then south. How big of a role does Oneida County and Herkimer County play in the 22nd? I mean, if you take Herkimer County, you take Oneida County, you automatically basically have a win, or is the population pretty strong down to the south?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I think what Brindisi is probably looking to do is to win Oneida County, to do quite well in the Binghamton area, and try to improve in the other counties where Myers was not particularly strong, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think any Democratic candidate is trying to do well in the two big cities, and then looking at the last campaign is trying to improve upon where Tenney did quite well winning some of the other more rural counties. So it's kind of the combination approach.
I got to tell you.
And then I think, and I think Tenney is trying to hold off on Oneida County, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's obviously her home area as well. And, as there's the belief that you have to be from up in the district to do well. So she's going to try to maintain not only her advantage that she had last time up around us, but also, to try to keep those margins fairly large in the other districts that she's probably going to win.
All right. John Zogby yesterday said to go down this road with her family, which is normally something that is basically off limits, leads him to believe that maybe there was some polling done and that she's finding herself in a real tight race. You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think John is one of the best, certainly nationally, and of course in this area. So I have no reason to disagree with him. I think the reaction to the comments are personal and emotional for a lot of people, and I think that was by design. And as we talked about, I think there's a larger strategy behind there, and I think it does in part reflect, it's not, desperation, at least some concern that this is a competitive race, and she needs to be fully engaged, and as we've seen, in attack mode earlier rather than later. Yeah.
Professor at Utica College, Luke Perry, thanks so much. Again, you can read NY22 Minute, the NY22 Minute, by going to ucpublicaffairs.com. Luke, thanks so much. We'll do it again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Quick break. We'll come right back.